Hey everybody, welcome back to Omens, episode 34. Um, Cancer, even though it's almost done. Alright, um, by the way, I'm your host Ryan, AM air pronouns, and it's third week of July. Well, for you it is. If you haven't figured out by now, I record these pretty much all at once, so I just throw a shirt on occasion. Um, so if you're wondering why I haven't mentioned the aliens, it's because I don't know about them yet. Um, but anyway, alright, so this is, of course, the third week. So we're diving into herb stones and astrology, basically. This is what this has become. So today we're going to look at Cancer, and I'm sure you've read the description by now. Althea and Moonstone. Alright, so Cancer is the fourth sign of the zodiac. It's a night or an exhale sign, so its energy is kind of more passive, more receptive, more um, quote feminine, um, bit more passive and receptive, bit darker, bit as opposed to it's more just a breath hound. It's a night sign. It's just a little bit darker, a little bit calmer and quieter, especially given that it's also a water sign, so it has to do with the emotions, with the soul, depending on how you see soul spirit, but that's how most of them usually do. It's also a cardinal sign, which means it starts a season. And in the northern hemisphere, that season is summer. And in the southern hemisphere, so like South America, it starts winter. And that's a small thing I've noticed is whenever, and this tends to come up mostly in paganism and other such shit. Um, when we talk about northern hemisphere versus southern hemisphere, usually when we say southern hemisphere, we just talk about Australia. And I got to thinking about it, I was like, huh. The, I mean, yes, but I think it might be because Australia is its own continent, as opposed to the fact that, say, South America is linked by Central America to North America, even though it's also in the southern hemisphere technically. So is New Zealand, a bunch of islands, and of course Antarctica. Um, but yeah, I just thought it was funny because the majority of our landmass on Earth is in the northern hemisphere. But when we talk about the southern hemisphere, we mostly tend to just, I don't know about the rest of you, but either think or just say, I tend to just hear people talk about Australia, and that's what I tend to think first too. But we gotta remember South America, guys. um, but yeah, so down in the southern hemisphere, it starts winter. Cancer is ruled by its planet, and yes, I know it's not actually a planet. It's just we call it in astrology. Its ruling planet is the moon. Um, it's a celestial body that we tend to group as planets. I mean, heck, we tend to group the asteroids as planets as well in astrology. Well, not so much the asteroids, I guess, but yeah. Anyway, that's just because they're one of the main parts of our chart. The metal associated with Cancer is silver, of course. Some of its crystals, anything kind of creamy white type deal. Moonstone, obviously. Pearl, white quartz, and quite a few others, most likely. Medical astrology, it rules the stomach, chest, and breast area. Um, actually, the stomach is like right around your chest area, if you actually think about it. But we're so used to like patting down in our tummy, but the stomach's actually higher. It's like right under your breastbone, I think. Especially in those of us with uteruses. I've heard so much stuff about people who have the uteruses taken out, and all of a sudden it feels like there's so much space. I can't wait till that. But anyway, it rules the stomach, chest, and breast area, so kind of here type deal. Sorry, that got blurry. Um, do, 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 do. Uh, the it's the crab sign, not crabs, the crab. Its glyph, that little 6-9 on its side, is supposed to be like the pinchers of the crab, kind of held like this in a protective mode. And its polarity sign is Capricorn, and we'll get into that in a bit. So the fact that its glyph is in its protective mode, that kind of tells you just right off the bat a lot about Cancer signs. Plus the fact that they're called the crab, that their their animal is the crab. Side note: in zodiac, there's only one zodiac sign that is not an animate object, and that's Libra, my sign. But anyway, so I'm not calling all Cancers crabby, just FYI. I mean, well, I am, but I'm not. Okay, I'm probably just shoving my foot in my mouth, so don't hang up on me. I promise I will explain myself. Alright, so Cancers, they are primarily introverted and protective, first and foremost. Cancer is the sign of the home. It rules the fourth house in our natal chart, which is our sign of home, our space and structure, the four walls, roof, and floor around us, our little box that we like. Cancers, they like that. They prefer to be home. The crab is one of the animals that carries its home on its back in a shell, even though crabs and crab shells are they're not like quite like snails and snail shells where it's really obvious. For crabs, their shell is them. More so, more less obvious, more obviously so than like snails. Wait, what am I trying to say? Okay, so you know how snails and hermit crabs have hermit crabs don't count because, yeah. So snails and turtles and tortoises, like there's the shell and then you see the meaty part of the animal and stuff, like the legs, the head, the tail. Now, technically, we do know that inside of that shell is all the organs and stuff of the animal. It's not like you see in cartoons where they can just, like, say, a turtle can just walk out of its shell and, oh dear, I'm naked. They can't do that. That shell is actually part of their body. Look up a diagram of kind of like a slice and half diagram of a turtle and its shell. You see what I'm getting at. But whereas crabs, their shell is so streamlined and integrated onto their body, you can't even fake or even cartoon thing this crab stepping on and going, oh dear, I'm naked. It's not. The shell is so utterly just part of their body. I mean, like with turtles and tortoises and snails, it is part of their body, but they can't squish back into their shell like those other three can. They just put up the pincers. It's like they're already constantly inside their shell pretty much. So that like that, cancers tend to be, their shell is who they are. They're more shy, protective, um, and as a water sign and as kind of a sensitive, wanting to be hidden sign, that's because they are all emotion and intuition. They tend to be some of the most highly sensitive people you'll meet, which is why they are so guarded, because they are very vulnerable. Um, they're also, once you really get to know them, they're the nurturers of the zodiac because they have to do with home. Um, and I did not bring it with me, but in my celestial tarot, the card for Cancer, which is the Chariot, by the way. It's got kind of a throwback to the Charioteer with the little white ghost in the background, but the primary image on it is of a woman with a veil on holding a baby to her breast, kind of looking down at it and feeding it, because Cancers are the nurturers of the zodiac. It's all about home and comfort and protectiveness and carefulness. It's comfort not in the way a Taurus enjoys comfort, but in this is home, this is safe. It doesn't matter how it looks or doesn't look. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be lush. It just has to be safe and comfy. Um, Cancers tend to be very tradition and family oriented. And again, because they're so sensitive and nurturing and giving, the downfall of that is that sometimes they can tend to, especially in their shadow side, tend towards insecurity, like I'm not good enough or whatever, because they are so vulnerable. And and that tendency can lead to over giving, like beyond what they can give. They'll just give and give and give. They'll tear their freaking heart out of their own chest and give it to you if they think you need it. Basically, they will give to the detriment of themselves, to get to the heart of it. Um, and because, again, with that water sign, that emotional, they can be both very loving and receptive, and they can be moody. All of us can to a degree, some degree or another. Do you remember when it comes to the zodiacs, when it comes to astrology, we all have all the zodiac signs. It's just different degrees of um, strengths in us personally. So don't say only cancers are moody. Trust me, even if you think you don't have cancer, you do, and you can be moody. So um, I can too. I don't remember where cancer is in my chart. I don't have a lot of it, but I know I have some. So again, they're the most nurturing and loving, but they're also kind of they're the hardest to get to because they constantly have that shell up because they are so vulnerable. Famous sun sign cancers: Princess Diana, of course, the Dalai Lama, um, Tom Cruise, and Meryl Streep. Now, those with their ascendant in Cancer, kind of a similar thing. They tend to be very highly sensitive and loving souls, of course. It's when it comes to the ascendant, that's kind of more your outward appearance, your first obvious persona and stuff. So they're not going to come across quite as they're either going to come across pretty shelled or very um, nurturing and gentle. They're actually some of the most nurturing and gentlest of all people. Um, or most likely, you'll get both. They're both very protected, but they're also very sweet and loving. They're not open. They're very sensitive. Um, they prefer to slide kind of sideways and quietly into a space as opposed to like overtly stepping into it. They just kind of slidle in, and then all of a sudden you'll notice they're there and they've been there, and it's like, when did you get here? About 20 minutes ago. Wow. Um, they do have a tendency towards moodiness, and when they get moody, they either retreat into themselves or they get very clingy and needy. Eh, so do most of us. Um, they are often described. Oh, sorry, I can't read my own handwriting sometimes. They're often described as moon-faced and attractive. I'm gonna guess kind of round and a little bit pudgy-faced, softer. I think that's what moon-faced means, and attractive. Um, and because Cancer does rule the stomach, they may have a tendency to gain weight and have digestive issues when feeling overwhelmed. Um, they're also empathic sponges, so they need to learn boundaries to protect themselves. Um, Basically, boundaries to protect their own energy. Like instead of just constantly bringing everything in, soaking everything up, they need to go, okay, no, my space. And especially since because of their loving nature, people are drawn to them as nurturers. They tend to go towards them and treat them as caregivers. So Cancer rising definitely need to learn boundaries. That's one of the challenges to overcome, basically, in this life. Famous Cancer ascendants: Angelina Jolie, Julia Roberts, Tyra Banks, and John Travolta. All right, So that's kind of the astrology of the sun and rising of Cancer. So moving into the constellation of Cancer. The constellation of Cancer is this little square that's got 4 arms going out from each corner. It's actually one of the hardest constellations to find because it's in the darker part of the sky, and we'll get into the mythology of that in a minute. Inside of that little square, I thought this was fascinating, is one of the messier objects of the night sky, and it's a cluster known as the Beehive cluster. It's nebula and stars, basically. But it's known as the Beehive, which is adorable. And lends itself a bit to this constellation's feel as is, because beehives, if you think about it, tradition and structure, rigid structure, but also home and family. Everybody's got their job to do, and it's inside the crab, so it's like everything is protected and taken care of. So again, with that kind of that home feeling. Um, Cancer is Latin, obviously, for crab. The Babylonians considered this constellation a tortoise, and Egyptians a scarab beetle, so it was also associated with immortality. Uh, the Arabians considered it part of the constellation of Leo, or they called it the muzzle of the lion or the mouth of the lion. And ah, the Chaldeans. Uh, Actually, we'll get to that in a bit. So, in our most well-known mythology associated with it, is of course the Grecian mythology. And it's considered to be the crab that Hera sent to distract Hercules while he was fighting the Hydra. And there's 2 ways this ended. One way is it pinched him. So the first way it ended is either he was like pissed off, crushed it under heel, and then Hera was like, or actually no, sorry, that's the second way. First way is, well, no, we'll finish the first one, second one. Basically crushed it under his heel, and Hera was like, God damn it. Well, you tried hard, so I'm gonna put you in the sky as a constellation as kind of, well, shoot, he killed my crab. But also, since you failed in your job, I'm gonna kind of put you in the darkest portion of the sky, so it's easiest to go to find Cancer, to see Cancer as a constellation with the naked eye. You usually want to go somewhere dark, where like outside of a city or something, like just away from the city lights and shit, so you can actually like look up in the sky, because it's a bit hard to find. The other possibility for how the crab got up in the sky is pinched Hercules' toe, and instead of crushing it underfoot, Heracles just kicked it into the sky, which I find even more hilarious. All right, so the interesting part about the beehive cluster inside Cancer is the Chaldeans believed that souls descended to the earth from a gate inside of the constellation Cancer, which we're pretty sure by which they meant the beehive cluster, which is why it's sometimes known as a cradle of life. So they called it, or from the gate inside Cancer, they called the gate of man. From what I can understand, we're not entirely sure that's specifically what they meant, but we're like 99% sure type deal. I forgot to actually get the dates that this constellation is visible in the sky, but it is a little bit, it's a ways after, it's in the wintertime, it's actually visible in the night sky, because obviously as a summer constellation, it's not visible during the summer because the sun's up when it's overhead type deal. And due to the rotation of the planets and stuff, it's no longer the constellation that the sun that's directly behind the sun when the summer solstice hits. That's actually Gemini now. But tradition, it's our summer constellation. It begins summer. The magic that it's useful for as a constellation is astral travel and psychism, dream work, and creativity. And the beehive, of course, magic used for that. It's good for prosperity magic, because bees, prosperity, work. Yeah. Okay. So the plant I picked for this was originally going to be aloe, because it's a feminine plant that's element is water and it's ruled by the moon, but its properties were um, I forget what they all were. It was like protection and something else. And then right next to it in Scott Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs was Althea. And I was looking at that, I was like, given that Cancer has to do so much with psychic work and traversing that in between of land and water, because, and that's kind of something I forgot to put or to bring up, is because crabs are kind of amphibious, both land and water. I don't remember if they're actually amphibians. Uh, I decided to go with Althea because it's still a feminine plant and it's associated with water, but it doesn't have a ruling planet. If I were to guess, I would say probably the moon because its specific uses are both protection and psychic powers. So I thought that went perfect with Cancer. Um, and psychic powers are ruled by the moon. So now I'm not much of a green witch myself. So if any green witches who do work with Althea have a dissent on that, cool. I'd be curious to know. So type it in the comments or email me. What do you think Althea's ruling planet should be? Do you think the moon's good, or do you have a different opinion? Look it up if you work with it, preferably if you work with Althea. I'm actually going to listen. If you just like want to say something weird or confirming, I'll be like, yeah. Um, but anyway, Althea is traditionally used in protection rites. And that's all Cunningham had is it's used in protection rites. So I'd assume probably in conjunction with other plants. Burn or carry in a sachet for psychic power stimulator. Now this was interesting. It is known as a good spirit puller. So when placed on an altar during ritual. So basically, if you want to attract a quote good spirit, place it on the altar while during a ritual to pull in those types of spirits that are good for your rites type deal. And now here's where things get interesting. So Althea is actually a genus. It's not a species of plant. It's a genus. The specific species that Cunningham is speaking of is Althea officinalis, which is also known as the marshmallow plant. So Althea is kind of mallow plants in general, or yeah, mallow plants in general. I think Althea officinalis is the marshmallow, which yes is where we get marshmallows. Even though nowadays there's no actual marshmallow plant in marshmallows. Marshmallow and commercially available marshmallows are all pretty much just pure sugar now. They don't actually have marshmallow in them. And the marshmallow plant grows in moist and sandy riverbanks and saltwater marshes. Likes moist and sandy. So again, with that association with the crab, which likes sandy beaches and it can go between water and land, the marshmallow plant also likes those in between places, that sandy on the riverbank, like kind of a bit, it's where water and earth meet type deal. It's you Marshmallow plant was used most often as a relief for mucous membrane irritations. So that's why they'd make it. Basically, it's the root of it. The plant would be ground up into a paste and used to soothe mucus irritations, like in the throat. Probably, I think it was used for colds as well. But yeah, it's good for protection. Probably good for at least some healing, and definitely a psychic power stimulator for primarily it looks like. All right, so that's Althea officinalis. The crystal, of course, is Moonstone, which is a stone of new beginnings. It's of course associated with the moon and intuition. It is very good for calming emotions. It helps enhance psychic abilities and clairvoyance and specific psychic powers. It's good for lucid dreaming. Its biggest thing is it calms overreaction to situations, calms aggression, stabilizes. It helps stabilize period cycles for those who menstruate, and through that, it helps with hormonal balance. It's helpful in shock, calms hyperactivity, like in kids. You can create a Moonstone elixir for insomnia, and the stone can also help prevent sleepwalking apparently. So all of this obviously take with a grain of salt. I've never used Moonstone for any of these, so do your research on the crystal itself and decide whether or not you want to use it for those. Same thing with the plants. None of this is medical knowledge, obviously. I tend towards, of course, more of the magic. So, like marshmallow, I'd probably burn it as incense for psychic powers. I wouldn't be. If I was going to consume it, I'd go look up all the herbal stuff. So that's why I get some of this information from Wikipedia as well as Scott Cunningham. But do your research, talk to your doctors, always. Crystals, I believe Moonstone is safe to put in water, but don't quote me on that. Um, Always double check, make sure you can actually put it, and if you can't find anything or you're just in a hurry and can't be bothered to look it up and you're not sure, put it next to the water. It'll still absorb the energy. The water will still absorb the energy through the glass, um, but without having to put the stone actually in there and possibly end up poisoning yourself if we're all wrong and Moonstone is not good, safe to put in water. Or another way you can do it is that I've heard of is, which is kind of a ridiculous amount of work, but I'd rather just put the stone next to it, is you could take one glass bowl, put the stone in it, and then take your glass of water, put it in next to the glass, next to the stone, or even pour water in that outer container type deal, which seems like a lot of work for basically the same thing, where you could do same result you could get if you just put the stone on a countertop or something with or put the glass of water on a countertop with the stone next to it, yada yada. And there's your elixir for insomnia, for helping with insomnia. Or even to help maybe enhance. Well, it says for enhancing psychic abilities, usually better burned, or sorry, we're not burning Moonstone. Carried in a sachet, or held in the palm of your hand or something. Or maybe you could use the elixir for helping with psychic abilities too. It's a possibility. As for the stopping sleepwalking, you'd have to like put it under your pillow or in your bed or something, or even on a nightstand next to your bed. That'd be interesting if that worked. That's cool. Alright, so yeah, short one. Well, I'm just getting more streamlined, I think. Anyway, so that is that for this week on the astrology, crystals, and herbs and crystals. Might change the name of the playlist. That's it for Cancer. So yeah, like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't, or like and subscribe if you haven't. Comment down below. Email me at bagsandnomens@gmail. Find me on Facebook at bagsandnomens. Unless, of course, I've changed the name of it already, which I don't think I probably will have. I'll try to do that before August, though, which, if I am going to do that, it's still on the table right now. But if it does happen, you'll see it. I think that's it, so have a great rest of your whatever, and I'll see you next week for the Wheel of Fortune. Bye.